to re-record up here. Okay. I don't know why it said my Mac is not running fast enough, but all right. Here we go. On 3, 2, 1. Welcome to this episode of Rock Talk with Mitch Lafon. As you can see, we are joined by a Megadeth bassist, David Ellefson. Oh, sorry, Grammy Award-winning Megadeth bassist. We got to get it right. When you win,
it's the difference between Paul McCartney and Sir Paul McCartney.
Yes,
guess, right.
Yes. Hey, when you earn the title, you earn the title. You got to use it.
I'll take it.
You got to take it. We've also got Drew Fortier, and as you can see, co-host Alan Niven. So I feel like I'm doing the red carpet at the Grammys or something. and coming out next, so wearing a beautiful no. Anyway, bonjour, gentlemen. I'll start with Dave. How are you, Dave?
You know, I'm well. I just got home from the Midwest. We just did a tour this week. We booked these dates to go out and promote the Ellefson No Cover record. Of course, not knowing, that the pandemic would be upon us like it was, but the dates were booked. So we went out and we did it. We masked up, we lathered up. In fact, a friend of mine, John Aquilino, who you might know from Icon, he actually has a new product that we actually use, or that I use, to lather up, slather it up on your face and everything. But we masked up, we went out and we did it, and just said a prayer and keep us safe, and went in and rocked the house and did our stuff. And so I just got home from that, and I'm a little tired, I'm not gonna lie. So I'm rebooting with some coffee. So I think you're muted, Mitch.
Uh-oh. We're re-upping with Ellefson coffee.
Yes, actually, yes, it is. Yep. So that was not a shameless plug. That just was a timely plug, actually.
You know what? Listen, we have to plug stuff. Just real quick, Alan, when was the last time you actually were in a room or even an arena with Dave Ellefson?
Well, I was wondering if Dave would remember this, but actually, it's quite entertaining.
I do remember it. I want to hear you tell it, because I remember it.
Okay.
Yeah.
There was a party in Soho, and Dave and his cohort Mustaine were there. And the last time I saw Dave was when Dave and I had to pick Mustaine up off the floor, carry him outside, hail a cab that I ended up paying for, and send him off to his hotel because he was a little the worse for wear.
That is exactly how I remember it. Yeah. Thank you, by the way, for that. I'll hit you back. I owe you an Uber.
I'll tell you what, I'll settle for a beer next time you're in Prescott.
No, that's on me. It's on me. And it's funny because we're right down the road. I'm in Scottsdale. You're about 2 hours north in Prescott. I'd heard you'd been up there for many, many years and kind of retired out of LA, and so it's good to see you again, Alan. We literally haven't seen each other since that fateful night in the taxi over in London. So
the taxi. Well, hey.
Yeah.
And I'll bet you that Dave Mustaine has no memory of it at all.
Probably not. I remember because you were like an angel. You appeared out of nowhere and said and whisked him up and he said, "I got this. Come here, boys," in the cab, and like a true manager, whisked us off and saved us from a fateful night in a bar somewhere. So
there you go.
Thank you. Yeah.
Alan, you never managed Megadeth, but was that ever a consideration in your business dealing? Saying, hey, you know what? You've got Metallica and we've got this other band that's making just as much noise. Did you ever consider picking them up or working with them on any level?
Well, it's funny you should ask that. Dave can probably help me out here, but didn't you have an independent female PR back in the day?
We did. Well, Val Janes, who worked for Rod Smallwood, did a lot of the Iron Maiden stuff. When Ron Laffitte came in, and so Ron Laffitte came in about late '89, and really kind of put us back together. Helped us get cleaned up. He goes, "Look, the world is yours. Capitol Records is waiting for a new record, but you guys got to get clean or it's over." And he's the one.
It would have been about that time, but this young lady had it in her mind that there should be a meeting of minds between us, and there were a couple of social events at her house, a barbecue here, and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
And I have to confess that I went away and thought about it, and I went, I need one more addict like I need a hole in my fucking head.
Maybe
I mean,
Susan Crane or somebody. Might have been Susan Crane. Somebody like, yeah, there was. I remember that, and I remember there was a conversation because we had a manager, Keith Rawls, through like Peace Ellis and So Far So Good So What, who Andy Summers, our agent, brought in, and then we went over to Doc McGee, literally for a couple of months, and Doc was very direct. He said, "We're here to make a lot of money. We expect our artists to work very hard. We'll make you very famous. We make a lot of money. You can do whatever you want, but if you're too high, we'll help you get help. And if you can't accept help, there's the door." And we tried to get clean. Those were my first rounds of rehab, and then we couldn't turn the corner. It took another year or so. So Doc sent us on our way, and it's funny because now we're good friends with Doc. We see him, of course, when we play with Kiss, and Doc is wonderful, and you know.
Well, don't take it personally. It was all about my state of mind. I'm sure you can imagine with who I was dealing with. I just don't have the capacity to take
In fact, had you agreed to do it, I might have had to put the hole in your head for thinking about it because we were all pretty much unmanageable back in that day, right? I mean, yeah. And me and a couple of your clients were hanging in sordid spots around the world too. So yeah, I know all too well. And it's funny. Another one of your clients, Great White, Rob, right? The keyboard player, right? What was the keyboard player?
Audi?
Yeah. Funny. I ran into him. I went bowling, of all things, here at like, I don't know, Dave and Buster's or something. It was like we did like a kind of a rock and roll bowling night, and he was there, and I had not seen him for many years, and I understand maybe he lives here in the Phoenix area or something. So it was great. He and I always got along well. We'd always see each other at parties around LA, and obviously you did a great job managing Great White and blowing those records up, and so he was always a friendly face in the crowd, so
he's always a very amenable guy, Michael.
Very much so.
Doesn't drink, by the way, which is probably why he's amenable.
Probably why he's amenable. Yeah, exactly. And we remembered each other when we saw each other. Oh yeah, hey, good to see you again, so Rock and roll bowling.
Rock and roll. So let's talk about somebody who's less amenable. It is the Sledge Chronicles Rockstar Hitman. It is this book of now, from what I'm gathering, so in order to become a rock star, you essentially got to sell your soul to the devil, or in this case, to a sort of a hitman organization. Talk to me a little bit about this and who came up with the idea. And Drew, don't forget to hop in whenever you want as well. But
yeah. Okay, so the idea started, I was in Sao Paulo, Brazil, literally a year ago in November, doing a solo tour. And a friend of mine called from Phoenix, and he said, "Where in the world are you today?" And I said, "I'm in Sao Paulo." And he laughed, and he said, he goes, "We all think you're this rock star, but I'm kind of wondering if maybe you don't work for the CIA or some covert KGB operation on the side, right? And doing hits." And I thought, dude, that's a great idea for a story. And I'd written 5 books, I guess now, a couple memoirs, self-help book, and another kind of lyric and poem book that I set the pictures and stuff years ago. And so, but I've always wanted to write fiction, and I've never had the story. And it's just one of those moments where the story just landed there. So, I called Drew because Drew and I are working with Ellison Films. We have a film that he created called Dwellers that we're going to put out here in February. So I called Drew and I always say, don't let his boyish good looks fool you. Inside of that mind is a demented personality. And I was on the airplane flying around South America, and I literally kind of wrote most of this book. I kind of framed the characters, got the idea tethered out there, and I hit Drew. I said, "All right, dude, time for you to bring in some of your demented work." And of course, he wrote a prologue that guy's head in a bag on a train, and I'm like, all right, this is it, And he came up with some wonderful ways to murder people, and which really kind of got the story, because it seems like everything I'm in, I'm kind of the straight man, and I'm always with like a funny man, the funny man straight man thing, right? So I needed like a kooky guy, which is what Drew does. And that's it. I mean, it's funny when I liken it to John Grisham. Grisham was a lawyer, and then he got into writing, and he kind of starts close to home with his books are law based because he's a lawyer, right? So The Firm, of course, being one of his first big works. So I did the same thing. I said, let me kind of bloom where I'm planted in rock and roll. Let me start there with the character and kind of and you can be somewhat autobiographical. My character starts in the Midwest, stars in his eyes, moves to LA, signs, the elusive record contract. But of course, in this contract, he has to work for this agency and has to do hits and take some people out during the day and then be a rock star at night. And
I just got to say, so sorry to cut you off, but as I'm listening to this, signing the record deal, in a sense, Alan Niven's your villain because he's the one who...
And in this story, we might actually have to take Alan out at some point. Who knows? I mean, that's the beauty of the story. The good guy becomes the bad guy, suddenly becomes the good guy, And so what's fun about it is this of course, takes place across the United States on the tour. That's, of course, there's a romantic interest and, all the things that sort of color and flesh out a story. And I'm actually working on book 2 now, where the band starts to go to Europe. And of course, that brings in a whole other level of international espionage and terror and, all kinds of other. So, to me, it was kind of like, well, there's a nice series here because wherever he goes on tour, there's bad guys. So he can go to South America, he can go to Asia. So I figure we got a nice little kind of Jack Reacher type, storyline that we can sort of, Jason Bourne, we can kind of, write out a few of these and
you can you can bring in the Scorpions and their CIA Wind of Change song. You can just roll it all in there. Alan, did you ever ask anybody to sell their soul to the devil when they signed with you?
No, I tried to make sure that they kept their souls and got a sense of what their souls were. But when you were talking about the book, obviously the thought that crossed my mind is, here's a great analogy of going to the crossroads and selling your soul.
Totally.
You work with the CIA. Now you've got your analogy, and you've got to sell your soul to the deep state or whoever.
And I think in some way, guys like me who grew up in the Midwest, Drew's from, lives in Indianapolis, there's this thing, this sort of, our rock stars were our heroes and Kiss and these guys, these were far away, they were like Marvel comic heroes, you know what I mean? It was almost unreachable. And so I think there was this, I know for me, I remember I was 16 years old rehearsing in my, the shed on my dad's farm, and Van Halen was starting to really blow up, and Ozzy Osbourne was getting his musicians out of LA. So we started to hear about Rat and Motley Crue, and Brad Gillis was in Ozzy's band for a minute. So now we knew of Night Ranger, and it seemed like it was all going on the West Coast, So I had to get to LA. And of course I get there and it's, now it's crunch time. It's rubber meets the road, and now, all my heroes, the Kiss guys, they live right up the street up in the hills, and Eddie Van Halen's right up the street. And, you realize, wow, okay, I'm in the pool with the big boys here. And there is that thing. It's like, who do you trust, And I guess, I'll give a shout out to my partner, Dave Mustaine there. He's tough and he's a fighter, and he would fight anybody for anything, especially to make sure that we got our way and made our way right. And I'm lucky because, who knows, I probably could have ended up like the character in this book, had I not had someone to have that kind of street smarts and savvy and everything. And Alan, of course, the guys you've managed, they were deep in the trenches and the streets of Hollywood, and they,
trenches, gutters.
Gutters, yes. Even lower than the trench, the gutter. Yeah.
So Drew, I've got to ask you.
Yeah.
How do you kill people? Do you use old guitar strings and garrote them?
Over to you, Drew. You do most of the killing in this book.
Oh, yeah. They're very, very imaginative kills for sure, and very, very brutal. And you ever see Marathon Man? The torture scene? It's a scene based off of that. I had a really bad toothache earlier in the year and had to get it pulled, but the pain I felt leading up to it was some of the worst pain in my whole entire life. So I wrote that into the book, where the main character gets tortured for a little bit, and it's just the way it's plays out is very, very, very uncomfortable.
There's pliers and hair dryers with eyes open, and good painful stuff. It's funny reading it. And again, we kind of, I guess maybe with Drew and I, it's kind of like two guys writing a song together. You kind of get to go, oh yeah, I love that great chorus. We kind of get to have that sort of back and forth with it. And it's sort of like when it, when your buddy comes up with a part, it rocks your world. You're like, dude, that's freaking sick right there, man. And I can feel the pain in my tooth, or I can feel an eyeball getting torched with a hairdryer is, it's, and that's just, of course, the setup to the death. But no good death needs to go unpunished. So it's Drew. Again, don't let this kid's boyish good looks fool you. He's a demented.
Wait, are you talking about me?
Yeah. And you too.
I had nothing. Okay, let me ask you this. You do have Dwellers coming out in February on Ellefson Film. Are you writing these books with an intention of eventually having like a Jason Bourne series where there will be a part 1 and a part 2 of the Sledge Chronicles? Or is this really just for book?
No, I think it is that. It's interesting. Music's not enough anymore, is it?
Nope.
Music suddenly becomes this, and we had realized this years ago, even in the 90s, our bands would get asked to write these, a song for an Arnold Schwarzenegger movie or Bill and Ted or whatever. And at that point, you're just a small player. As big as our bands were, you submit a song to a soundtrack, you're just a very small part of a big film. But now, all these years later, you look back on it, and it's really about, as you're creating content, and I don't think we're thinking about it like that, but we're creating, books and music and film, and, you kind of become this, you're using all of your faculties. It isn't just about music anymore. Now you are writing a book, and in Drew's case, he's thinking sort of, how does this translate to, to the film world? And I absolutely, I mean, I think anything you write now, you think about like, hey, it doesn't have to just stop on a record. It doesn't just have to stop on a book. And what's kind of fun is, Vin from the band Sponge is actually, he's our cover model here. He was kind enough to give us this photo, and he is our character for Sledge. And interestingly enough, Drew and I and Vinny and Mike Heller from Raven and Fear Factory, we were actually in the studio this summer, and we wrote a record, and it's a record to go along with the book. I don't know that it'll come out simultaneously. Well, it won't come out simultaneously because the book's coming out in December. But we have a record that we did together. And I've always been a big fan of Vinny's vocal work, of Sponge, of course. And, this is a year of interesting collaborations. It's this one year where kind of, I think, everyone's off the leash. All things are open for possibility. And Drew sent me a couple of tracks that he and Mike were working on. And I thought, this is really cool. This kind of deserves some really kind of just simple, cool bass playing to it. And then when Vinny got involved with writing lyrics and stuff, and we all met out in LA in July, Vinny actually flew out just for a couple of days from Detroit. And we were hanging out. I was like, Vinny's a freaking rock star, man. Like this guy just oozes freaking rock and roll, man. And he's just one of those guys. And Alan, when you get in the room with real rock stars, you just feel it. The room changes when they're in it, and it was cool to do a record. So, at some point, probably next year in 2021, we'll put that record out as well.
That was a cool thing too, because when the four of us got in a room together, we all just clicked, and the whole time, and we didn't play a note of music together. So that's how you know you really got something cool going on there, when we could really get along without having music be the ultimate tether, So we just kind of all got along as human beings. So that was really cool and really important too. So that was a fun time.
As opposed to some bands where you make great music and you hate each other.
Exactly.
That's unfortunately a lot of the Sunset Strip bands now. When you look down the road, they're all fighting, and there's 4 versions of the same band, and
It's an interesting documentary.
There's a lot of great content. Alan, go ahead.
I was going to say, I've got to slightly disagree with you there, Dave. When you say you're in a room and you sense that presence, everybody I knew, first of all, I wanted to keep it grounded, keep a center of gravity. And the other thing is they all grew into their personas. The problem is when they didn't know when to leave the persona. And I tried to explain, bottom of the steps of the stage, you're you. Top of the steps of the stage, in your persona. Come off, go into the dressing room, cool it out, be you again.
And that's what makes you an awesome manager. Probably a manager who got fired more than once or twice because you had actually some sort of semblance of, because let's face it, how many of us, when we walk off that bottom step, when we're coming off the stage, we don't want to hear that, And sometimes it's the walk to the dressing room, Sometimes it's even an hour or two after you're in the dressing room. And of course, that's when other illicit behavior happens, to try to come down off of that. And and speaking to that, it's funny, being on tour with Alice Cooper years ago, I always said, Alice he's probably really, of course, he's been in the business many years, and he learns, too, that it's like, on stage Alice is the villain, he's the most wicked evil guy there is in the makeup, and come off the stage, the makeup comes off, he goes back to being Alice, the golfer, the father, and he's very clear on that role. And I always really we flew around South America together on the tour, and I really admired that about him, and he brought that whole thing back home. But you're right, when we're young, we just think it just keeps going, and I can forever be that guy. And I say young, meaning certainly in our 20s. By the time you hit 30, if you haven't had a rehab or a divorce or a bankruptcy or a couple of other things happen, that'll learn you. That'll wake you up pretty quick. So
I think part of and I parted way with two bands, but in retrospect, I look back at that, and one of the factors, I think there's an aspect of eventually it's called paternalism. They get to a point where it's like, I'm in control and I don't need to hear dad anymore.
Right. And it's a thankless job, isn't it? It's I've managed a couple of groups as well. I managed one little Mormon band out of I did it as a favor to the record company. He asked me to do it, and then once I was in it, I was like, "You son of a bitch!" Now I get it, because I was like, "Hey, we got some shows with the Used up in Utah," and they're like, "Oh no!" And then they started quoting the Bible, like, "Well, the ox and the mire, and we can't work on Sunday." I'm like, look, even Christian artists work on Sunday. In fact, it's their best day of the week. Like, get your fucking guitars on and get on stage and play. You know what I mean? So you start getting that kind of backlash.
That ain't gonna fly with a Mormon band.
No, no, it didn't, and it didn't fly with me as a manager. That was over quick. And you're right. I mean, again, we've all kind of gone through it. Especially, it's interesting when you manage someone from an artist point of view, because I have zero tolerance. I'm like, look, I'm 56 years old. I've had certainly my successes, and as we all know, all successes are born of probably 10 times as many failures. And it's like, look, if I'm still willing to get in the trenches and get in a van or get in a car and go drive around and play, I certainly expect you to, So I kind of figure in my companies, that's the benchmark, If the boss is still willing to do it, then I expect everyone else to do it too, And I had a manager years ago. I remember when I did artist relations for Peavey. He told me, he goes, I'm not going to work any harder than my band is. And he said, I'm not going to beg you to come to the table of your success. If I got to keep begging you to do this, then you're not cut out to do it. So, and I got that, I wake up today as excited about rock and roll as I did when I was 10, 11 years old, getting my bass and learning my first song. So,
well, for me, I had a slightly different perspective as well, in that, for me, it was not a job. It was a way of life.
Yeah.
And in that it was a way of life, it was 24/7, 365.
Yeah.
And when you find yourself naked in your kitchen at 4 o'clock in the morning, trying to get the accountant out of bed so as he can get some cash out of his safe, so as that you can get Axel sprung out of the sheriff's office before they send him down to county, then you know what I mean about 24/7.
I do know. In fact, I just accepted some interviews I'm going to do on Thanksgiving. Tell my wife. We'll eat dinner later after we do that. But hey, they're in Germany. I got to do interviews. You got
to do interviews.
So yeah, it's like, to me, it's like, oh, that's right, it's a holiday. That comes like second. And it's sometimes I got to reframe that a little bit, because I just go. But well, and look, and Alan, for you, it's probably one of the reasons that you were able to retire with a conscience, is that you did your part. Like you said, you ran it as far as it could go, and when people didn't want to listen or take direction, it's like, well, my job is done, and off to Prescott. You have a bar,
yeah,
right?
And thank you for saying that. But it's also the realization that this does not define my life. That moment when you get a record, you get a Grammy or something, you get a record that goes to #1, you sit there and go, I don't feel any different. Hasn't changed any of my problems.
Yeah.
And you wake up one day and go, What else is this all about? This is all too consuming.
Well, the truth of it is, as soon as you get the gold record or the platinum record, there's just that tomorrow the phone rings for just more of the continuation. You know what I mean? And it can be a bit like a drug. It's sort of like I remember talking to my dad about that because he was, the Ellefson men have always been businessmen, never music businessmen. But I was talking to my dad about that. I said, it costs $1 million to sell 1 million records. And if you can sell another 7 or 8 on the backs of that first million, that's where the money's at. A platinum record doesn't necessarily mean you made any money. Right. It's like, if you know what I mean, by the time you've toured and you've tour support.
How much did you spend making a Megadeth record? What was your average budget?
Those early budgets. I mean, I remember, first record was $8,000. I think the second record, Combat Records, allowed us $25,000, and then fortunately Capitol came in and picked it up. So off $25,000, we sold 500,000 records. So, but again, there's videos and tour support and all the rest of that stuff. So $500,000, we didn't really make any money. And then they were, 100-ish, 150-ish, so they were, they were enough, but again, when you start getting into big studios and you're locking out studios at $1,200, $1,500 a day for 3 to 4 weeks to do. Usually we'd cut drums and bass in the bigger rooms, and then we'd go to the smaller studios. But then by the time you mix and everything else, so 75, 80, 100 grand goes pretty quick, and then by the time you turn it in and you make a video or two, and videos back in those days were anything from 80 to 100 grand, 150 grand, 50% recoupable from the band. Yeah. So, and then you go to Europe and you're going to lose money, and go to Japan, make some money, go to Australia, spend it all. And, but the good news is doing all that, now, again, I can sit back and have some mailbox money because we did all that work back then, and that's kind of the long range vision we always had to have was, hey, listen, guys, you're going to go over, you're going to, hey, many tours for many years, my guitar tech made a lot more money than me. Me and Dave, the owners of the business get paid last. So you got to pay for your walkie-talkie company and the lighting and the buses and the crew and everything else and your payroll taxes. And, finally, that's why one hit record can turn the corner, but then you got to still keep the machine going,
What exactly the machine? I mean, one of the things that you become aware of fairly quickly is if you're developing some momentum, you tend to develop a whole bunch of people that you're responsible to keep them paid and happy, their mortgages paid, and big old machine starts rolling. I mean, that's basically what killed Jerry Garcia, was trying to keep that machine rolling all the time.
Yeah. And that's why when rehab comes in, it just stops the machine and it stops the momentum. You know what I mean? So, and look, rehab is part of rock and roll. I mean, it just is. I mean, there's things that, right. I always said nothing feeds momentum like momentum, when the juggernaut's rolling, man, and you can just keep that thing going.
I think we generated a T-shirt back in the day, a tour T-shirt, with all a list of the rehabs: Hazelden, Exeter, Sierra, Tucson.
You're not really a real rock and roll band unless you've been to. I always said, Guns, Motley, and Megadeth, 3 different sort of genres of rock and roll, but pretty much the same band. Kind of the same right to the edge lifestyle. So hey, that's what makes great rock. The Sex Pistols, I mean, these guys, they were our heroes, and we didn't necessarily try to recreate their path, but they sort of made it allowable, I guess, at a certain day. And that's why by like the late 80s, I remember by 1988 when Doc McGee started to manage us, that now rock stars were going to rehab and movie stars and stuff were coming out, and it was like, it was no longer, hey, do you want to go to a bar? It was like, hey, you want to go to a meeting, And I was like, man, these guys are raining on my punk rock parade here. What the hell is this shit? Sobriety? What, And, but, by 1990, I got clean and I've stayed clean ever since. And it's been great. But those 88 to 90, those 18 months, that was rough, man. That was a hard turn. And I'm lucky I made the turn because a lot of our friends didn't,
True. I hope you're making notes here because in one of the future books, you're going to have a section in the book where your main character has to go off to rehab. And
absolutely.
And some really malevolent but gorgeous female tries to kill him there.
I think that's amazing. Yep, yeah. I think Dave's writing it down right now.
We might have to call you in for a quick consulting on that book.
Absolutely, that's a great idea.
Yeah.
I think
perfect.
We should do that. I think we should do that.
I'm going to ask you just two real quick questions. In that time of 88, 89, 90, did it ever get to the point where you were like one drink or one thing too far from death? From like, did you almost get to that? I'm not coming back.
I mean, so I was 23 when I first went to rehab, right after Donington, Castle Donington in August '88. And I'm lucky, and I was strung out. I mean, in fact, Guns played right before us. I remember a couple of fans died that day, were killed. I mean, there was like 107,000 people and no barricades like we know it today. I mean, it was a free for all. It was like Woodstock of heavy metal, it was just full on. And, it was heavy. And I mean, I was really strung out. It was bad. I was detoxing, of course, and I went right home from that, went right into rehab in Van Nuys. And, I say it, my soul died before my body died, meaning I hit a bottom that I just couldn't take sort of emotionally and personally. Other people went straight to the bottom, and one shot was too much, and their heart stopped, and that was it. And they were done, and we buried those people, of course. So I'm lucky that, and I've heard it said, hitting bottom can be described as the next thing you're about to lose is more important than the dope and the booze, So for me, I saw my career, Megadeth, everything that we were working for going away. I had no girlfriend. I had no money. We couldn't get to rehearsal to write a song. I mean, we were stopped dead in our tracks, and we had everything. We had a record deal, Capitol Records. We had it all. John Jackson was our booking agent. Andy Summers. I mean, we had everything in line. We just couldn't get out of our own way, or get out of bed after, being strung out just to frickin' get into, get just to write a song, and that was the point where it was just stopped, So, Alan, you're lucky you didn't come in. I mean, you'd already been in those trenches with other folks, so you're lucky you didn't come into our world at that point. And that, it's funny how I was talking to a friend of mine at lunch today, how management can be this great sort of Al-Anon codependence thing if you sort of allow that, or what, sort of, and some people, of course, come in, fortunately in our case, Ron Lafitte came in and scraped us up off the bottom and set us straight. But I remember there was a day I came home from the dealer's house. I was totally strung out. And I mean, I just broke down, and Ron looked me straight in the eye, and he just said, he goes, listen, man, if you want help, I will stop and drop everything to get you the help, but you have to want it. And that was a defining day. I was in this apartment that Dave and I lived at over at Studio Colony in Studio City. And I just said, you know what? I do. I want help. And that it's funny when you say I want help, when you sort of verbalize it, and you sort of put it out to the universe, it sets it in motion, because that was the beginning of the end for me. And that was really it. And it took a few months after that to finally get one day clean. But, and ironically, Alan, I was only about 3 weeks sober. We were in with Mike Klink out at Rumbo, cutting the Rust in Peace record. Wow. About 3 weeks sober. Yeah. Yep. And Dave had one more. He talks about this in his book. He had one more trip back into rehab, and for him, while we were while we were cutting the tracks on that record. But yeah, that was it. And Mike, of course, being a wonderful soul, and that's where you guys cut Appetite for Destruction. And so we were kind of on a similar path, with
a wonderfully patient soul.
Yeah, isn't he? Mike was a
really
wonderful
patient.
guy.
I mean, that's why we selected him. I mean, you knew the characters I was dealing with.
Oh yeah.
And, the idea of putting a Roy Thomas Baker with Guns N' Roses. Yes, that's going to work. No, that's never going to work.
Not going to work.
I need to find the most infinitely patient person I could,
yeah,
who was good with guitars and had worked with Michael Schenker. Because if you can work with Michael Schenker, you can work with anybody.
It's funny you said that, because me and Marty Friedman would sit here, and it's funny. We were obviously impressed with the Appetite for Destruction, but the album, of course, that really, we were fans of from Mike was when he mixed, UFO Strangers in the Night under Ron Nevison. And so we kept asking, come on, tell us some Schenker stories. We wanted to hear UFO stories, probably the same way your band did, probably the same way I'm sure Slash and the Guns guys were probably wanting to hear some UFO stories. And, and it's funny because Slash and I were hanging out quite a bit in late 88 and early 89. And he wrote the foreword to the Rust in Peace Megadeth book that just came out. So he talks about that. And, we became good friends and did a lot of guitar playing, and our lifestyles were very similar in that moment. And in fact, there was a moment we kind of tethered it out to Slash, like, well, what would it be like if you played in Megadeth, And he had just come off of Appetite, of course, and the floodgates of money, I'm sure, were about ready to just pour open, and it had never been right for Slash to play in Megadeth, but he was a good friend, to me and Dave. And obviously I got to know him as a guitar player and musician. And, once I got sober and got clean, we kind of went our separate ways for a few years just on. And of course, I think the next time I saw Guns N' Roses when we played at Rock in Rio in 1991. And it was amazing to see. The last time I'd seen Guns N' Roses play, but the first time I saw him was opening for The Cult, I think, at Long Beach Arena. And they still looked kind of like a club band. And then they played before us at Donington in August 88. And they'd been on tour with Aerosmith. And it was like, wow, these guys are freaking kicking ass. Like this band has stepped it up. And then 3 years later, in 2.5 years later, I guess, at Rock in Rio, and suddenly they were the Rolling Stones. You're like, holy hell, like what happened? And I mean, so those steps of that band was
Alan
so
Niven
great to
happened.
see.
That's what happened.
Yeah, it was impressive because again, you had a lot of personalities. You were working around, and but it's been great. Slash and I have remained, good friends. In fact, he just took me and Frank Bello from Anthrax. We have our little side band, Altitudes and Attitude. He took us out on tour last year over in Europe, and Slash doesn't need a support. He sells these places out on his own. You know what I mean? So that just goes to show
he's a good soul.
He's a bro, man. He's a good friend. He's a good soul. He is. He's really good. As big of a rock star as he is, I mean, he's just a down-home guy, man. So I can't say enough great about how cool he is.
Yeah.
So I'll ask you two other things, and then I'll let Alan wrap this up. You and Drew have a band starting, or you're going to do some music together, from what I understand?
We have this group that we decided to call it Lucid. And it's just now it's a record, and Lucid kind of describes the sound of it. And it's just a record. I don't know when it's going to come out. We're finishing mixing it right now. I think Vinny's got all the vocals done on it. And it's just something we did this summer. It went from, again, one of these, hey, dude, you want to play on a track, to, hey, now we got 12. In fact, I think I went to LA. I played like 10 songs in 2 days. I was exhausted.
Yeah, you were a trooper, man. You were a trooper.
But I was in it. I just cut the Megadeth record. I just cut the Ellison No Cover record. Went straight to LA, cut 10 tracks with Drew and Mike and Vinny. And, it's a cool sound. I'd say it probably has kind of an STP, kind of Stone Temple Pilot-ish kind of vibe. Meets Sponge, of course. Vinny's a very defined sound to his vocals. So we're going to, send that around and see what what comes of that as far as getting that released. And of course, next year there'll be a Megadeth record. I think Sponge is a record coming out. So there's, going to start to be some traffic now opening up. So we got to
a lot of traffic. And we'll bring it home to the Canadian traffic, of course. You've got Sword. They just put out In Command, the single. Yeah. I've had a chance to hear some of the songs. It's a great sounding record. You're, of course, the label. What do you think of what you heard? Is it good to go, or are you happy? Are you
the Sword record? Yeah, from what I've heard of it, I think it's amazing. In fact, I got to still hear the final mix version of what they have right now. But yeah, I mean, Rick came through town last year, and that's when I heard the first bits of it. And Rick is one of the you sit in a room with guys, and they you kind of almost can't tell if it's great or not because they sell you on it because they're so passionate about, oh my God, check this part right out. Sing this chorus right here, and you're just like, yeah, this is great. He's just totally pumped you into the moment. And, but it was great. It sounded great. And it had that Sword sound, and it was heavy, and it was modern, and it was thick. And, they've never been so much of a full-blown, I mean, they're a metal band, but they've got a very clean melodic sound to them, which I've always loved about them. And Rick is, again, a great soul. They're a good band. They're good dudes. They've done a lot. That's a band that's been around and definitely has made its mark.
Oh yeah, and I mean they've opened for everybody. They've opened for Metallica. Yeah. They've opened for Frank Marino. They work hard. Rick Hughes, who's the singer of Sword, knows hard work. I mean, he
does.
But on that, Alan, I will let you take us home. I will say for my part, merci Drew, merci Dave, and Alan. The floor is yours.
Well, obviously, and first, it's really cool to see you again, Dave. I think a cab is turning up, and we've got to go and jump in it.
Hey, you own a bar, right? Don't you own a bar up in Prescott?
I made that mistake. I mean, when I first came out here, it was to get away from anything and everything LA. Yeah. And to get away from people and to get away from politics and betrayals and bullshit and all that crap. There's an old saying that seekers find what they need to find in the desert. And some it takes 40 days and 40 nights. And me being slow, dumb, and stupid, it's taken a lot longer. But there came a point where I'd been out here for a while and I was starting to get a little antsy and itchy for human energy around me again. Yeah. And of course, I thought like a dumb rock and roller. And I thought, well, what do you do after the gig? Oh, well, you go and have a drink. Well, let's open a bar. Probably the dumbest thing I ever did in my life. And I ran it for 3.5 years. It was a nightmare. I ended up firing every manager I tried to put in there and ended up doing 70, 80 hours of work a week, starting every morning with cleaning toilets because only the owner will clean a bathroom properly. And it was just a hell.
Yeah.
2 good things came out of it. I had a lot of college kids who would work for me. And after we closed, we'd sit there until the early hours of the morning and having young brains and young conversation around me was what I needed at the time. And I met my second wife there.
Nice.
She used to come in and to piss me off. She'd try and dance on my pool tables. And that was... We had discussions about that.
Oh, that's great.
That's great. That is cool. It's man, it's great to see you again. I hear your name.
Dave, never ever open a bar.
I won't. And being a sober guy, there's no need to. I tell you what, I did have a coffee store back in my little hometown in Jackson, Minnesota. And I'd sort of infused some cash and helped kind of bail a store out and put my name over it. So I did have a little experience with it. And I can see very quickly, because people started coming to us about how do we franchise this and do this. And I'm just like, good Lord. It's like my passion is to be a musician and a rock and roll bass player and on tour and stuff like that. Yeah, exactly. I was like, man, that's not for me.
One of the few interesting things that Picasso said was that we all have the right to choose the age at which we live. And he chose 25. And I thought, well, he's a little bit of he's an immature character. So I'm going to take 27. So for a long time, I've been 27. I'm beginning to feel I've got to go to 28 now. But
nice. Well, I'm holding on to 29 as long as I can, right?
That's it.
Yeah, you got to hold on to 18. That's the song. That's the song, right?
Drew, looking as young and handsome as he does, he doesn't have to hold on to anything.
Exactly.
Oh, Drew, thank you for setting this up. Alan, thank you as always for joining me, and Dave, always a pleasure.
In fact, I was thinking about you today because I've been chatting with Tal Bachman on email. On the Ellison No Cover record, we did a cover of Not Fragile, and I wanted to get it over to Randy and to Tal, and I guess Fred has heard it now, and so I'd sent it over to Robin Bachman as well. When I first moved here down in Chandler, Arizona, they had the Ostrich Fest, and BTO was playing there, and it was the 3 guys without Randy Bachman. It was actually another guy named Randy, ironically, and Marty Friedman and I went and kind of fanboyed out on him, and Robin became a good friend, and remember he came to see us on the Euthanasia tour a couple years later when we came up through probably Abbotsford or Vancouver or something,
Yep,
So
out west, yeah.
And I got to play with Randy Bachman when I was doing artist relations. He came into PV for a short bit, and I jammed a couple tunes with him at a PV party at the Hilton there in Anaheim. So yeah, it's nice. It's kind of a nice revisit back to the Bachman family and BTO, and of course the band that got me into this whole thing at age 10 when the Not Fragile record came out, so it was fun to cover their song and do an honorarium back to them. So it's ironic that speaking to another Canadian today. So
yeah, yes,
since you're basically our Canadian A&R arm.
I'm the token Canadian.
Yeah, right.
I'm the token Canadian. So. And Alan's a token Canadian too. He's hung out with me long enough that he's got my Canadian sensibilities.
Nice. N'est-ce pas, and all Canadians snowbird in Arizona. So there's the circle right there.
They do. And Alan, the next time the Minnesota Wild show up for the Glendale or for the Arizona things, you and Dave must go together.
That sounds like a good idea.
You're a hockey fan?
I am. My son's a big hockey fan. I'm a marginal fan. I'd definitely go to a game with you though. If you want to hit a game, let's do it.
You're on.
Let's do it. Love it. Great.
Thank you, boys. Thank you, gentlemen.
Right.
À la prochaine.
Thank you so much. It's been an honor.
Great.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you, Drew.
Bye.
All right, let me turn.